Hello, everyone, and welcome to the news space. My apologies for the technical issues with the last one, but hopefully, this will be a new and better one for you all to listen to. Thank you to everyone who already tuned in. This is going to be a new one. I'll just wait for some of you guys to jump in here. So, just going to send a couple things here. There we go. Hopefully, y'all can hear me now. Hopefully, it's going well. I'm going to send it to a couple of other people. There we go. Well, welcome back, everybody, and thank you for standing before. I wondered because people kept dropping in and then going out, and I didn't know quite why. So, yes, the mic is back on, and I will just begin again here. So, what we're talking about today is the concept of the boomers, and really wanted to discuss them in a way that hasn't been done before. Because we tend to either gloss them over or we tend to ignore them, or there are points where we tend to just leave them, sort of laugh at them, and don't really discuss the formative influences upon their lives. And what really got me thinking in this direction was a deal the other day where there's a Stephen King tweet, and some of you may remember this, where Stephen King said, "Hey kids, if books are getting banned from your libraries or they're getting banned from your schools, you need to go over right now and you just need to let them know what exactly is going on and you need to read it for themselves. Find out what they don't want you to know." And he got eaten alive basically because this is the dissident right, or the trolls of Twitter, or however you want to put it. They basically ate him alive with the edgiest books imaginable. But it kind of caught at my heart a little bit, almost in spite of myself, because he was operating from such a pure kind of old paradigm. And he was clearly thinking of books like uh, Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse Five, or he's thinking of it in terms of what are some Lady Chatterley's Lover, all these sorts of banned, scandalous books from days gone by. And he got a response he never anticipated. Now, I chose Stephen King because he seems to define some of what it means to be a boomer and what it has meant to be a boomer in the past. And I think when he started writing, or when he started working, it was in a very different scenario than what we have now. And I'm going to go into this a little bit. And I'd also be interested to open the floor afterwards to other Americans, or people from other parts of Europe or the world, because I would be curious to see what idea they have about boomers. So what are the stereotypes about them? Materialistic, individualistic, have no real conception of family beyond themselves. They have no real concept of, you know, tradition, identity, and so forth. But that isn't quite true. And of course, we have to be careful anytime we're making sweeping generalizations about an entire generation. That's not something that you can really do with a lot of accuracy, but we can actually learn some things from generalizations. Now, I started reading Stephen King books when I was around 17 or 18 years old. And at that time, it seemed like, this was just about the coolest thing you could do as a, as a late teen. This was just so edgy and mature and grown up. And I can sort of laugh at it all now. But to begin with, what everyone knows kind of The Shining, and people know it to a large degree. And he for a long time worked with and kind of popularized a type of horror that I don't think you could really do now. And he did it in a way that will be immediately recognizable to most of you. This concept of, well, there seems to be an idyllic small town with all these different people there, but really there's just darkness and evil underlying it all. There's that this man may seem to be a loving husband and father, but actually he's, a secret rapist and he's got a substance abuse problem or something like that. Or you'd get these sorts of people who are like, well, this little boy riding down his bike, he may seem to be a clean, bright kid, but actually he's got secret sadistic tendencies that he indulges in the basement of his home, or all this sort of thing. But it's all hidden beneath the glamour of suburbia and in this air of respectability. And this is a type of horror that was, I'm sure, very effective at one time, but it's completely lost its punch now because one look at the news and you're like, quiet horror doesn't really do it for any of us anymore. And but this was what he did, and this is what he got used to. But there are some aspects to his work and to his life that I think reveals something about the boomers. And one of the series that I would read back in the day was one called The Dark Tower. Some of you might be familiar with this. And it was a sort of a it was the sort of thing where it was supposed to cross different worlds, and it had the effect of, there was a sort of our world, or a world that seemed like ours, but there was also his world, in his being a character called Roland, who was supposed to be a gunslinger, but he was a very interesting and rather illiberal, survivally survivalist minded sort of a figure. More on that later. But the cultural references that King would use to make this fever dream world seem real, and he did, was he would, just to give an example, very early on in the very first book, there's this gunslinger who, by the way, is based off of Clint Eastwood. So that is explicitly based off of Clint Eastwood. And he goes into this backwater sort of dive in the middle of this desert. And what are they playing at the piano? Well, they're playing Hey Jude, which is, of course, a Beatles song. So again, it's this sort of surreal fever dream of, it's the Wild West, but there's other parts and other bits thrown in. But beyond that, he spoke to a paradigm in which the sort of whiteness of America, or the backbone of that, was taken for granted. And even if it was condemned on some level, it was still considered to be the backbone of everything. The other companions that Roland gets in this figure, one of them is a kid from late 60s, early 70s America, and he's a child whose father, is a successful executive at a television studio, but he's very distant, and has a little cocaine habit on the side, and you get the impression. The other one is a heroin addict from New York City from the 1980s, who has to sort of overcome his addictions in order to press on with this great quest to find the dark tower that it's underlying all of humanity. And the final one is, you want to talk about woke. The final part of the character is actually a black woman civil rights activist who's a double amputee and has schizophrenia and so forth, but who can kind of overcome that. Brilliantly realized character, it has to be said, but at the same time, she's capable of extreme malevolence and actually ends up pregnant with a demonic child at the end of it. So I'm not quite sure what subconscious thought took place there, but it's an interesting aspect of it. And furthermore, there was this degree to which the gunslinger Roland himself is a very interesting character, and I think it tells us certainly about King, but also a little bit about a boomer sort of hero as well, because he's a gunslinger, which of course is a term from the old American West, about which so many romances and movies have been written and played. But actually, Roland is also in this world a gunslinger, is a sort of knight errant, and indeed, Roland is the descendant of King Arthur, and his guns uh, actually come from. It's supposed to be the melted down sword of Excalibur, of all things, and so you begin to learn what's at the heart of Stephen King's sort of his mindset and his vision. And in spite of all the liberal aspects, I can't tell you how strange it was having read some of Stephen King's works, because in this character, in this world, the gunslinger's guns are supposed to have been inherited from his father, and they're literally the melted down metal of Excalibur again. And so Stephen King, on one level, is writing things like, you shoot with your heart, you shoot with your mind, as you live your life, you keep the face of your father before you, all this sort of radically traditional stuff. And yet at the same time, when you log into Twitter, you find him tweeting, for the most part, just the most milk toast, middle of the road takes. You go from your guns are your lifeblood to, you know, the again the most liberal takes on gun control imaginable. It's quite a strange brew. And again, I think this does actually tell us something about where the boomers are. And I think King encapsulates this. And again, to return it to this broader theme of the boomers, generally speaking, and again, you can't make sweeping generalizations about any generation and have it be 100% accurate 100% of the time. But they are a generation of contradictions, and I think rather than just simply laughing at them, it is important to understand them and to understand how they see themselves. And they were a generation that they were a generation of transition, and most of them, even alive today, remember a very different world from the one we now have, and they remember a vastly different paradigm, but they themselves have helped facilitate it to what it is now. And so with recent years, with the okay boomer memes, most of which came obviously from the left, there was a great sort of confusion seen with the boomers where they didn't quite understand what was going on. And why should they? Because even as they've gotten older, they still define themselves in terms of sort of youth culture and youth rebellion. Don't forget, for many of the boomers, some of their earliest heroes were people like Clint Eastwood, the sort of rugged individualist, very American male of a certain type. They were the James Deans, these sorts of tough, youthful, rugged figures. But at the same time, they fought, for the most part, they rebelled against this paradigm, and they certainly have facilitated the rushing in another. And I think they are so identifying with that youth rebellion, they don't quite know what to make of it when it's turned upon them. And they don't quite understand what it means to have the tables turned on them, although it's what they did themselves so many years ago. Now, the other thing to give them their due is that the boomers were clearly influenced by cultural forces which pre existed them. The boomers were not writing their own college curriculum when they staged the Berkeley riots or whatever defining moment you want to have of them. And I think there's a large degree to which they maybe can be cut a little bit of slack because many of them were duped. And this strange part where you kind of have to love them is when you go to the kernel like that and you find that in his heart of hearts, what does Stephen King want? What does he see as the ultimate righteous force in the world? Well, actually, at the end of the day, he sees it as a as King Arthur, effectively. That's what you have. And the he calls it midworld, this sort of surreal mirror image of our own world that he writes and fleshes out so skillfully. It actually reveals a lot. He identifies figures like JFK. with being gunslingers and knights errant. I don't think you would find that from someone now, and I don't think you would find someone looking back on that period necessarily making that distinction. And I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from the boomers predominantly. Learn from their tragedy, because those of us who want to understand the world around us, those of us who want to influence its direction, I don't know that you can ever completely just ride on youth culture and youth rebellion forever. There has to be something grounded, and you can't just rely on this youthful energy forever. And that seems to be the ultimate lesson of the boomers, is that you can't forever just rail against the establishment, because they did rail against the establishment. Then they became the establishment. And now, when there's youthful rebellion and complaining against them, they can't quite understand it. And in many respects, it's a great tragedy, because there are weirdly traditional elements that seem to poke through every now and again within them. And was it in there from their childhood? Is it because people do get more conservative as they get older, and they tend to switch to the right more? Well, maybe. Maybe it is. And I don't know that they ever will be able to come to terms with it. But they have bridged a gap, and they bridged a gap between a much older world and a paradigm where we in which we are now. And that old sort of wicked undercurrent beneath the glittering suburban surface, so much of that is not even really accessible to us and to our thought anymore, because you're like, from our perspective, who cares if there's an executive who has a drug habit on the side and isn't the family man he presents himself about, uh, transgender children in the media, etc. It's You just become desensitized to this stuff. So that's my initial sort of spiel. There's, wow, very good number of people now. I will try to open the floor if anyone has anything to add or anything to say. All right. Up, there you go. Um, XX. Hey,
Hello.
hey, how you doing?
Pretty good. I'm not that familiar with Stephen King, so I can't really comment on that. But just one thing that I was thinking about was like, because you said how the boomers were influenced by people before them, and then I was just thinking about like the contrast between Star Trek and Star Wars. Like
Hmm.
like Star Trek almost seems like a more modern like thing because of how I believe they're atheist and like I don't know, just like a lot of the concepts on there are like kind of more modern. And then when you look at Star Trek, it's like about the Force and like religion and it's like more militaristic in a way. Like even in Star Trek, like the I don't know, the humans like they're more like democratic almost. They're not even that like militaristic. And I don't know, I just thought that was interesting because the Star Trek creator is actually like 20 years older and the Star Wars creator, he could be considered like a an early boomer, I guess, but I don't know. It almost seems like it should be the other way around, just judging by like the content of the shows. But that was really my only thought right now.
Yeah, that is a good thought. I think what's interesting about that too is that uh, Star Trek, from what I've seen at least a little bit of the different shows, and certainly the original one is definitely, because that actually predates the boomers. The boomers were all children when that came out. So, yes, obviously they didn't originate that style of liberalism. But the original Star Trek, you can tell it came out right after the United Nations came around first. And whereas Star Wars just doesn't seem to really address the same questions. Again, it's about swords, and I'm talking the old stuff. It's about swords, it's about bloodline, it's about mysticism, and those are the core concepts. Those are what makes people really fall in love with it. And beyond that, it's all this sci-fi stuff is almost just trappings. And there is a very strong Arthurian element to Star Wars as well. Great. Oh, Mr. Spencer, it's an honor. Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? Trying to. Maybe I need to mute myself first. There's a request. So, hello.
Oh, hello.
Hello. We can hear you now. It's an honor, sir.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I sometimes these wires get crossed or something. It's when you let me in the first time, I was like couldn't hear anything, but who knows?
Oh,
Um, yeah, I think this is a an interesting discussion. I had a good conversation with someone this morning, and I was kind of riffing on this idea of the end of history and where we are right now. And I guess my conclusion is that so much of culture now really does seem to be a kind of remix of the 20th century in the sense
yeah.
that there really is nothing new under the sun. And so we're kind of like ironically rehearsing previous things that are new. And just a few examples to illustrate what I'm talking about. Like I remember having a conversation with a younger person. He was saying that all of these millennial or Gen Z girls, like who are 24 or something, they would have like Nirvana LPs or something, and that was what spoke to them. And I can remember because I was born in 1978. I can remember Nirvana coming out in 91, and it was very shocking. It was very punk, but it also was just like a full-throated expression of where we were at the time. Like it encapsulated the zeitgeist of the end of the Cold War. Who are we? National decline. What are we going to do about this debt and so on? It was just a real expression of like a darker social mood that made sense. And it's almost like it's lost that temporal quality, and it's now just a kind of ironic remix for 24-year-old girls or whatever. And I do feel like these things were new and shocking, but also highly relevant. And I do feel like we've entered this point where there's like a just total we're remixing the 20th century, and we're kind of resonating with the 20th century, but we're not really creating something new. And I think even with something like AI music creation, which I've seen a few videos, I've heard listened to some of it, I've seen a few videos of people making it. It will there'll be a video that I saw where it'll be like, all right, I want a remix of Axel F with a love song lyric or something. So, and look, the music is remarkably good. When you think about it, like a computer generated this in 5 minutes. It's remarkably kind of listenable. But even that is a kind of expression of like AI is an expression of remixing things that are already out there. There is like it can be interesting and good even, but it's just inherently like radically derivative and also like radically dissociated from the contemporary world. Like it doesn't really speak to us now. and we look at it through a kind of ironic lens where it's kind of funny, if anything. And so yeah, those are just some thoughts on like where we are as a culture. I do think that on some level history has ended, and culture as we know it is a mixtape or an ironic rehearsal, an ironic parody of the 20th century. And anyway, those are just some of my thoughts. This is kind of like a bigger thing I'm kind of thinking through right now. Probably there's probably like a 20,000 word essay in here what I'm saying, but I think it's actually quite true.
Yeah, thank you for saying that as well. A couple of thoughts on that. One, as far as the Nirvana thing, I had a discussion actually with a Zoomer girl the other day, and she loves sort of grunge '90s stuff as well, but all sort of ironically or almost sort of a wanting to go back to that in a way, which I thought was interesting. So clearly there is something to that. The other part that you said about uh, everything's a rehashing, everything's a rehearsing. It reminded me a little bit of a Slavoj Žižek spiel that said one time, and I think he referred to Kung Fu Panda, which is a film I have not seen, but he referred to it as a that it incorporates all these ideas of the chosen one of everything, and it does so with humor, but it's like through humor the ideas become more powerful, and then people genuinely experience it again. It was interesting stuff.
I kind of agree with that. I last weekend I saw um Puss in Boots, which has been out for a little while, and I saw that with my kids, and they definitely liked it. And it's a good film, and I agree. It's a kind of like ironic remix of all fairy tales and fantasy novels and so on. So they'll like reference Cinderella, and then they'll reference, I guess the villain is like little Jack Horner. So it's kind of funny, but in so you could, if you were a traditionalist, you could almost say that like, oh, this is just ruining everything. It's a mishmash and whatever. But I actually was kind of moved by this story. It had an interesting message about affirming, appreciating the life you have, and kind of fighting against death, but knowing that he's going to win. Like it was actually kind of a good. It was an interesting message, existential message. And But I kind of agree. Like the trad person would look at that and be like, oh, it's not a true retelling of these stories. But maybe in that like ironic mismatch, we almost get it. It's their power or something. Yeah.
Yeah, that is fascinating, and thank you. I don't know quite when you got on, but one of the things that I'd mentioned here was the Dark Tower series by Stephen
Hmm.
King, which he regards as tying everything together. And for all of these just sort of basic bitch liberalism that he seems to spew out there, his own novels reveal something deeply thought out. What does he want at the end of the day? Well, actually, he wants a sort of King Arthur mixed with Clint Eastwood to become king and make the world all right again. It's
Yeah.
almost poetic on some level. It almost could make me cry if I think about it long enough.
Hmm. Yeah, I am not. I have never read the Dark Tower novel, so I listen. I jumped in a little bit late, and I didn't quite. Yeah, I'm not able to quite put the pieces together just because I'm unaware of the novel. But I can definitely see what you're saying. Like, if you read Stephen King's Twitter account, it's the most basic bitch thing you could imagine. But there's a kind of like mythology behind it, and a quest for heroism and so on. Yeah.
It's crazy. I'll never forget being surprised because I first read these books when I was around 17 or 18. In reading Stephen King seemed like the edgiest, most adult thing you could do,
Yeah.
and and so I did, and I enjoyed these stories. But then I'll never forget the shock of reading this figure who's saying, "You shoot with your heart, you shoot with your mind. Uh, these guns are inherited from your father; they're your lifeblood." and the face of your father must always be before, just this radically sort of traditional type stuff. And
Hmm.
then and then you log into his Twitter account and he's like, guns are killing people, and we need to take every last one away from everyone. It's like, man, I just read your book. What's this?
Right. Right, but I kind of almost agree with them. Like I almost agree with them on some level. Like there's something primal and dangerous and traditionalist, if we want to use that word, and about the gun or the sword. You know, pulling the sword out of the stone or inheriting the lightsaber of your father, who's Darth Vader. Like there's something almost like primal and mythological about that. And then when conservatives get their hands on guns, we see them like holding a AK-47 or an AR-15 in a Christmas card photo, or like a pink AR-15 for girls or whatever. It's almost like stupid, and there's no point to it, and all it is like a something that could be used in a horrible way, like violently at school or something. And there's almost something like it's been totally reduced by taking away the guns. You're almost like protecting the power of the gun, if you know what I mean.
That's really fascinating. No, and obviously the kids who get AK-47s or ARs, they are not thinking of it as something like, my father had this and they're passing it down.
No.
That's not their mindset at all. Actually, just to kind of expand on the archetypes with the books, the gunslinger's initial motivation, it's in a world that's supposed to be sort of next to ours. He goes into, just early on, he goes into like this like honky tonk dive that you would expect from a Clint Eastwood movie, and they're all singing "Hey Jude," the Beatles song behind the bar. It's this sort of fever dream world. But actually, to play with archetypes, his father is the king of this dying world that can't hold together, dying almost in a Spenglerian sense. It's constantly
Hmm.
said the world's moved on. It's all about collapse and decay. And but then, ironically, his father gets literally cucked by this evil wizard who helps the last little shred of civilization fall into decay. And at the beginning, it's Roland as a grown man tracking down this evil wizard to fill him full of holes. Effectively, that is his quest. Initially, it's to take revenge on the part of his father. Again, it's so primal,
Yeah.
and it harkens back to the first stories in such a strong way. And then there's another part in there too where it's like, well, actually, an Arthurian knight errant would he would be on board with civil rights, and that's
Right.
another part of the story. It's just such a look at the sort of boomer soul. It's
Hmm.
fascinating to me.
Yeah, don't you think like American conservatism in particular is this? It's this almost like perversion of traditionalism to the point that it's almost like worse than being a liberal. you
Yeah.
know, like what I was saying with gun culture. Like again, my particularly my maternal grandfather was a shooter. I mean, he would go do pigeon shooting contests. He hunted probably 100 days out of the year. I mean, he was absolutely into it. But I mean, he was born in the 1920s, and I mean, like he had a very different upbringing and like connection to the gun, and I would definitely imagine him looking at like some who was that Massey, this like boomer congressman doing a Christmas card photo with an AR-15 at the house or whatever. He would look on this and just be like, this is just it's just horrible and stupid. And obviously there's something just like truly profoundly sick of the Uvalde shooter buying
Oh
this
yeah.
high powered weapon the day he turned 18 and then blowing away children. I mean, there's just something just so profoundly horrifying, sick about it that it's just like it's this like weird. I don't know. It's like we've lost that kind of primal connection, and so we have only these like perverse relationships with these things that actually are traditionalists. Like there's a power in a gun, and a gun you inherit from your father. There's, you know, you don't have to be too Freudian to kind of see something there, if you know what I mean. Like you know, there is this like primal connection, and we've seemingly lost that, and so we have like all we have is this like perverse traditionalism of conservatives.
It almost seems to be an overcompensation of sorts. I mean, to some degree, doing the Christmas card with the AK-47s, that strikes as just a surface level middle finger to the left in some
Right.
sense. But there is something actually a little sick about, do you want this beautiful Christmas moment to just look like a festival of death? I mean,
Right. Yeah. It is perverse, or even like the forms of Christianity that are appealing to them. You know, it's like, you know, I presume this culture is still going on. I remember reading about it in the 2000s and like the Bush era, but like you go to a mega church where some people are even wearing like pajamas to the mega church, and you're talking about how God wants to help you pay your mortgage, and there's like in some cases an actual Starbucks in this mega church. Like there's something like if I were a Christian, I would hate that with such a fiery intensity, you know, like it's almost, I would prefer you be an atheist than to be a Christian in that way. You know, like I say
yeah.
that absolutely genuinely, and I'm not a Christian, but I get it. You know, like I have much more respect for like a country church with 5 people who attend than I do for this like mega church where it's about, you know, money and yeah, it's just it's gross. It's almost worse than being an atheist. It's yeah.
Well, the 5 people at that country church are at some level, they're unironically looking towards eternity, and they're
Hmm.
doing it in, you know, good faith, purity of heart, however you wanna do it. The Starbucks, there's something a little cynical about that. I don't think you're supposed to ever look towards eternity from Starbucks.
Right. Yeah. So I maybe the liberals are, I don't know, maybe in the deep liberal soul they actually they think a little bit more like this than we would imagine.
Maybe they do. Uh, it, it is interesting, like you mentioned, that difference too between receiving something from like a weapon from your father, which actually, in full disclosure, I have in an older style of gun as well. I would add.
Hmm.
So I can see a little bit of what that's like, and there is a power to it. These school shooters, there's no sense of transcendence. It's a tool to make the world around them match the nihilism in their mind.
Yeah. Or the
It
nihilism of a video game that they're obsessed with. You know, I mean, it's yeah, it's truly horrible. It's truly perverse.
Yeah, no, and it's at the same time, you I guess I'd be curious to see what you think of this. Did you think the boomers were the last unironic generation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think maybe even the 1980s when they were my age, that is in their 40s or middle age or so, oh, around that. I think that was in a way the last style,
Mm,
um, because everything, not that, you know, obviously like fashions change here and there, but that was the last time that I think there was a recognizable style in clothing, music, etc. And the 90s was kind of a bridge, but you know, over the past 20 years, like everything is just a remix, you know.
yeah.
You know, it's like you know, when you do like you do a song, you're referencing 80s synth pop, or you're referencing 70s punk, or you're referencing 60s ballads, or some you're not really doing something that's like temporally intact, something that just speaks to us right now, and that's kind of new and shocking in a way. Like to go back to Nirvana, like when you listen to Nirvana now, it's almost like benign or something. Like there's
Yeah.
some, like even when he's like screaming and banging the guitar, you could almost imagine listening to that like at a restaurant or something, and just like, oh yeah, that's a good song, that's a great
Yeah.
classic number, yeah. But when it came out, there what like people were denouncing it and like horrified by it or baffled by it. It was like, what is this? There was something, it was like the shock of the real. Like there was something like immediate, and it was wildly popular as well. But there was something kind of like immediate about it that just grabbed you by the collar and shook you. And
Yeah.
it's now a kind of like benign muzak on some level. And I think that's kind of like all we have. We just have muzak now, and with AI music creation, it's going to go into some horrible place of palatable, maybe fun, but and listenable, but just ultimately palatable, and that's not shocking, and that's not relevant type of music.
Yeah. Well, with the Nirvana theme, who would have guessed that heart-shaped box would be the next jitterbug?
Right.
Oh, I remember that one from when I was a kid.
Yeah. Yeah,
It,
that is funny.
I guess the other thing too, you've mentioned AI a few times, and I think it's worth questioning as appalling as AI could seem to be, and there's yeah, and it gets memed so much it's a little difficult to figure out how much to believe, but you get these AI responses of if there was a person standing next to me, I would kill them for fun or something horrifying like this.
Yeah.
But is there anything that AI could do or any development that would really surprise or shock us on a fundamental level? Because, like, when the Terminator films came out or something like that, the idea that AI could take over the world just seemed shocking and horrifying and
Right.
compelling, and it was a bleak vision. Is there any outcome that AI could do now that would really surprise us? I'm not sure there is.
No, I actually have done some, if I'm not trying to plug here, but if, on my Substack, you can go listen to discussions I've had about this. Maybe you've heard them as well. I am, I am like I'm an AI skeptic on a like a fundamental level. I don't think AI can ever will something. AI is not going to become a Terminator robot and kill us all due to the like due to bloodlust or a desire to conquer or a desire to make the world a better place or some, all of that sci-fi stuff is are metaphors for something else. It's I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't think at least at this point, a non-biological entity can ever will in that sense.
Mm,
Um, but I'm also kind of an AI doomsayer in the sense that, and this relates to what we were talking about, like, you know, if you're 15 right now, like, what motivation or incentive do you have to learn how to write a 5 paragraph essay? What motivation or incentive do you have to learn how to play the guitar? What motivation or incentive do you have to like draw in your spare time or something? And these skills, like this is part of civilization, is kind of passing these things down. Like you teach young people the ways of the world, like this is what it means to be a Christian. We believe this. Like this is how you hunt a duck. This is how you play the piano. Like these are these skills like pass there, and they're a kind of intelligence in a way, and it's kind of passed through generations. And at I think I'm a doomsayer when it comes to AI in the sense that like we lose all of that, and because it's just so easy to have a logic machine do that for us, that we become like children, or we become like mentally retarded basically as a
mm.
species due to this. And I think that's actually like an extremely bad thing. I almost wish the robots would want to kill us. Like that would be interesting. that would that would like that would inspire us like to like higher levels of humanity in a way. You know, we'd have to fight back and so on. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is that no one will be able to create art. No one will be able to like write an essay, and we're going to become retarded. And just for the sake of not getting banned, I mean that in a actual medical
Sure.
sense. I don't not using the R word, but yeah, we're like that's a huge danger, and that actually is horrifying. And in that way, I am a doomsayer, and I think we need to have a conversation about whether we should smash these things or not. To be honest.
Well, again, to return to the sci-fi space, one of the tenets of Dune famously is "Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a man's mind."
Yes, the
Uh,
Butlerian jihad. I might be. I'm sympathetic towards such a jihad. Yes, we need to have a conversation. Like we need to stop having these nerd conversations about like that are basically Hollywood metaphors about like, is it going to become a Terminator robot? And we need to also not have nerd conversations about like, for the good of humanity, should we give the controls of the world over to a computer so it can be better, and maybe it will kill us, but it's a new speed. Like, these nerd conversations are we need to get rid of them. They're useless. But we definitely need to have a conversation about like are giving over like replacing ourselves and like losing these skills like let's not be like optimistic libertarians and say like, oh, it will be great, we'll just go to a higher level of skills or something. Like, no, we're not actually. Like, we're going to go to a lower level of civilization through this, and we just need to have this conversation about whether we want to declare Bulgarian jihad or have a big smash fest of the computers. Like, we need to talk about that.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's isn't it true that AI is already at the place where it can pass that Turing test?
Oh, there's no question. I mean,
Yeah.
I actually went to Chat GPT and I actually asked it, I was like, is God dead? And it wrote in a matter of a second, it wrote a totally reasonable and good essay about like Nietzsche's concept and its relevance to the world. Like, when I was a grad student, if someone had handed me that essay, I would have given it like an A. Like, it was
Wow.
good. Yeah, no,
Wow.
I'm absolutely serious. So I don't. Yeah, the Turing test of like, can you differentiate it from a human? I I don't know. I mean, there's another kind of test. I forgot what name it was, but it can a machine that can make a machine, like a machine that can start producing more of itself, like replicating in that way. I think that's almost a more like profound level. But yeah, I think it's clearly past the Turing test. It's more intelligent than most of humanity. So there's in a way no point to humanity. Like, if you're just a normal guy, like, why would you possibly want to even think about these things or learn how to write an essay or read, Nietzsche, and then so you can write an essay? Like, why bother? It's all there for you. And yeah, I mean, so like, why not just sit on TikTok or watch porn and masturbate all day? Like, this what we're witnessing, like, again, I'm not a Hollywood doomsayer. I don't think Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to come down and kill us, but I definitely am like another kind of doomsayer. I do think that there's a like horrifying potential to all this, and I have sympathy towards a reaction against it. I think we might just have to smash it.
It's a kind of a very subtle Frankenstein. I think one aspect of it too is that currently with AI, that there's nothing to it that not necessarily anything to it right now that we haven't put there. It makes art because we've made art. It
Yes.
it gave you a 5 paragraph essay because we create 5 paragraph essays right now. Uh,
Right.
the day when, like you mentioned, it begins to create something of its own, and it can, that actually might be somewhat surprising. Probably horrifying, but that actually might be somewhat surprising.
Right. But I mean, one rejoinder to that is that most all humans don't create something new. Like, most all students are just rearranging other people's ideas and rephrasing and so on. So in that way, it's not different than like most of humanity. But I also don't think we like to go back to the Nirvana metaphor. What's interesting about Nirvana is not their musicianship or even their creativity exactly. Although they did have creativity, they had terrible musicianship. It's that they like tapped into a collective mood or like a zeitgeist of humanity. That they tapped into something called 1991 and just expressed it. Or whenever that album came out, it definitely came out in the that end of the Cold War period. It was a different time for you youngsters out there, um, and they tapped into it, and so they kind of expressed who we were as a herd. Like who
Mm,
are we as a people, and where are we in history right now? What do we think of ourselves? Like they tapped into that, and I think if you tap into one of like an AI music generator, you could say, okay, create a punk song that's edgy and dark, and it could do that. It'd be like, I'm not the only one. Like it could do something like that,
yeah.
but it's not real. It's not like it doesn't come from like it doesn't come from who we are as a people right now. It's an ironic remix of where we were in circa 1992, and in that sense, I do think it's evil.
It's it
I'm
yeah.
kind of getting religious. Smash this shit.
Well, it's significant that it inspires what a religious response, quite legitimately so. And
Yeah.
I was at the theater again with the Nirvana thread, uh, a while back when the Batman released. I did go to the theater to see that
Hmm.
one, and it had Nirvana. I'm pretty sure that was actually Nirvana, the Something in the Way,
Yeah.
and then it had Nirvana-esque music throughout the rest of it. And I remember kind of looking around at other people in the theater and kind of experiencing that one myself. And I, you know, had a couple beers before I went in, so maybe that had something to do with it. But I remember when the opening came and it's Nirvana and it's all being played straight and absolutely unironically and so forth.
Hmm.
Looking around at the faces, and people were unironically into it and watching it with just no hesitation. And it was like it managed to break through that kind of ironic thing where people were in it. It was like being at a blockbuster back in the 80s or something. Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe I'm reading too much into it, but and when those chords hit with the down tempo simple guitar, it absolutely hit the theater like it would have hit in 1991 or 1992.
Yeah. Well, I did a thread a while back on Tom Cruise,
Mm,
and and I think he's getting at this as well because like when people go see a Marvel movie, even though the CGI, not always, but might very well be like photorealistic, and it's hard, but when you see like a floating aircraft carrier crash into a city or something, you just know this is fake. Like there's just no way you possibly think that this is actually happening, and it
sure.
actually does kind of bring you out of the story, you know in a way that like watching a fantasy, like watching Neverending Story, which was pre CG, the Neverending Story, great film, I love it. pre CGI, like even though it's ridiculous, there's like a guy riding a snail and or riding a big dog or a flying dog. You still just give into it because like it's fantasy, but you just turn off that little critical faculty of your mind, and you're just like, wow, I love this. He's riding a snail. That's awesome. But with the Marvel CGI, it's too realistic and it's hyper real, and so you're like, wow, that's great CGI. You're not in the story.
Yeah.
You're ironically distanced from it. You don't actually believe this is happening, and it's hyper real. It's too real. And what I would praise about Tom Cruise is that, like, when he jumps over like on a rooftop or he jumps out of a helicopter or like all this crazy shit he's doing, it's like, holy shit, he's actually doing it. Like it's like the return of the real, and
Yeah.
yeah, he's not going to die. We get all that, but like there's a chance he might die, and so there's something like I think those Mission Impossible films, they're not great art like in terms of plot or character or dialogue or whatever, but they're kind of great spectacle in the sense that like you see the real there, and you're not ironically distanced from it. Maybe because you think Tom Cruise might die. Like I think
Mm.
he broke his leg or something in the last movie. Like you're like,
Yeah,
oh
he
wow,
did,
I can't
didn't he?
believe. Yeah, so and and as opposed to the Marvel movie where you're saying that's great CGI. That's your response. It's not, oh, I feel for the people of New York because this floating aircraft carrier crashed into the building. You don't feel that. You
Mm-mm.
feel like that's great CGI. And I would even say that, like with the never ending story, to use an example, you're like, I'm so glad he found the magic dog. Like you've given into the story. You're invested, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh wow, I hope he passed this next test. Like you're invested in it. And I think there's something evil and nihilistic about Marvel in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting with Marvel because even that's shifted. I obviously don't keep up with all the projects, but I did see I saw a little bit actually. No judgment for anyone else in the chat here. A
Hmm.
little bit of WandaVision, where every
Uh-huh.
episode references like a sitcom from a specific decade, and they go through and they do it somewhat accurately. But it
Hmm.
was such a like a remix within a remix because no one's going to make a 1950s sitcom with that sort of light humor and laugh track and that sort of thing anymore. But even Marvel has shifted away because I remember watching, when Iron Man first came out and the first Captain America and like that kind of 2008 to 2012 period. And it wasn't all ironic quite yet. They were still telling the stories, and even
Hmm.
with the very first Iron Man film, uh, I would imagine you have your criticisms of the American military industrial complex, and I certainly do too.
Sure.
But at some level, you are being invited to say, "Hey, this sort of playboy figure who's a lucrative part of the military-industrial complex, he's pretty damn cool, and it actually
Hmm.
is cool when he blows up a tank in the Middle East." You know, it's shifted so far even from that.
It's shifted towards it, there's no relevance to it. Because I agree. I remember I've seen the Iron Man movie, I think twice. I saw it in theaters, and then I think I've watched it since. And there was a kind of edge to it. Like you were, because he was kind of Steve Jobs and all, but also kind of like an evil George Bush era military contractor. So there's a kind of edge to it. Like you didn't quite like him. He was a bit of an anti-hero. But
Mhm.
I guess, are you saying that, like, as Marvel goes on, things become just totally, like, they become less relevant in the sense that it's just ridiculous, like, Kang, what is the quantum mania, Kang the Conqueror and the multiverse of madness, or you're just like, I don't give a fuck about any of this.
Yeah, I never saw that. It shifted from being even like with Tony Stark, he in those first ones, he'd make a quip or he'd say something, but
Yeah.
it's almost like it's masking what he's really thinking underneath. It was
Yeah.
almost you could doubt the humor even in the context of the film. Or like with Captain America, that was a straight retelling of the 1940s comic book character, and they tried to make it like a period piece, and that was
Right.
played unironically. There's quips, there's a couple cheap action stuff. So what? It's still being represented as a hero's journey on some
Hmm.
level. But then, yeah, you get the stuff that's just how much CGI can we shit out, and
Yeah.
you marvel at that. And then though I haven't seen it, but you throw all these beloved characters in alternate versions, and after a time, it ceases to amaze you, and it's just you just get jaded to it in a way that you don't when you watch 1978 Luke Skywalker fire up that lightsaber for the first time, and he's like, "This is your." It's just,
Yeah.
yeah. Sometimes less is just so much more.
I agree. The way that I would suggest is that we're now unironically admiring the technical mastery of Hollywood, like the guys
Mm,
doing CGI, and in some ways, like story becomes an afterthought, and that really is sick. And I think that's a kind of that's a it's peak like that's when people start tuning it out. Um, Even though I'm sure there's tons of people on social media who are be like, "Oh wow, amazing! Have you seen the latest?" But
yeah.
it can't. You need to kind of like reduce things and go back to something. And Tom Cruise, like I saw this on YouTube, like he's they're referencing a lot of Bond movies as an aside in this upcoming Mission Impossible. But there's a
Interesting.
little yellow car reference of For Your Eyes Only, and anyway, I see all this because I'm, you know, a Bond fan. But he's doing for real the stunt from Goldeneye, where he's jumping a motorcycle into midair. But
Oh,
again, yeah, I saw this. There's this movie on, excuse me, a video on YouTube where they go into the stunt, and I was thinking about this. I was like, it's like we're so jaded because there's so much artificiality that you almost need to like feel. You need to fear and feel for Tom Cruise. You're like, he's doing this for real. He's actually driving a motorcycle off a cliff, for real.
wow.
And but so it's like pure spectacle, but then it is like the return of the real, and so that it's really happening, and so you actually can get invested in it. And I don't know. I've not certainly seen all Marvel movies, but I have no investment in them. They're
No.
they're just like they're pop cultural ephemera. I almost watch them just to kind of like analyze culture. So like I don't care about them. But like a year ago when I watched the Neverending Story with my kids, actually, I was like totally invested in the characters.
Yeah.
Like I cared about what was happening. And the some of the hokey special effects, they just wash over you like water up a duck's back. You're like, all right, who cares? It's fine. What you did is cool. Like, I don't care if I don't care if you
Yeah.
see the wires, like, whatever. I just, and so anyway, I think that's kind of where we are. I think we're post culture, like almost like post myth, as you were talking about. Like, we're now just almost like admiring the technical prowess of Hollywood, or their outsourcing of CGI effects to India or something. We're just like admiring that, and I think that's actually that's genuinely sick.
It is. Well, what in 1991, 1992, was anyone admiring the technical mastery of Nirvana or Kurt Cobain?
Exactly.
No.
He's a
Um,
totally mediocre musician. Yeah, but he just spoke
yeah.
to some. He spoke to the me at age 13 or however old I was. Like he expressed what, and I think even adults as well. It wasn't just youth culture, because adults were freaking out and things like that. But he spoke to the temporality of being alive in 1992.
Yeah, what was the famous "Smells Like Teen Spirit," and it turned out that was a deodorant or just, like, the most
Yeah,
hokey thing you can imagine, and then it becomes this youth anthem. I mean, I'm not sure that could
yeah.
happen right now.
No, no, absolutely not.
It would be yeah.
It's an ironic TikTok video with like a nurse dancing to a AI generated hip hop synth wave thing, you know? And it's just horrible.
No, it really is, and you wonder because there always is a next, you wonder where this goes because sometimes there actually is a swing the other way, not to
Mhm.
sound like just a bland conservative, but sometimes there is a swing the other way, and I think that you and I both had experiences recently with, like, Zoomers liking Nirvana, but you almost
Mhm.
wonder if there is a hunger for a real, so they just latch onto the last thing that seemed real.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to have to overcome the 20th century. I mean, to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, like so much of what we call culture now is an ironic remix of the 20th century. I mean, even the alt right was a kind of like ironic remix of the Nazis or something. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
everything, and Biden is kind of an ironic remix of Cold War kind of stuff on some level. I mean, again, I'm very impressed with Biden, but there is that level to him, and I think I don't think we've overcome that yet. Like I don't think it's possible to do something new on some deep level, and whether that I think that's going to only happen after we pass over a certain horizon.
Yeah, you mentioned, as far as the irony, I haven't looked into it too deeply, but I did see a little bit of the State of the Union address highlights from last night, and it zones in on the heckling, and not to get, too far into the weeds here, but I was looking at that and I thought Biden handled the heckling from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene
Oh
really
yeah.
professionally and really well, and I'm like, I think I would be more embarrassed in that situation about, you know, your ass getting owned by Joe Biden while you're trying to heckle him. I mean, what a low bar on some level.
Oh, there was this. I remember this scene from. If we want to go on a new road here, I remember this scene from Stephen Colbert, like back in the Bush era, when he was actually a lot funnier. When he was sending up Bill O'Reilly and Rush Limbaugh or something with this character called Stephen Colbert, and it was it was very funny. Like he he said something that got a laugh in the sense of like, you know, like, well, that's why we're spreading democracy to Iraq or something. And there was this huge laugh from the audience. And he very deftly flipped it on. He was like, I'm glad that everyone out there still supports the president. And so he turned their laugh into like support for George W. Bush.
Wow.
And it was very funny. And he got a second laugh for that. It was very deft. And I think Joe Biden, in his kind of bumbling way, did that because, you know, like he said, there are some people in the Republican Party who want to end or sunset Social Security. That is objectively true. You know, like you
Yeah.
cannot deny the fact that there are think tanks dedicated to that prospect and politicians dedicated to it. George W. Bush attempted it. You know, I mean, and he said that, and they're like, "You lie, like shut up, lie." And he's like, "Okay, like, like, you're right. Okay, I'm glad you oppose them too." Like he totally flipped it on them,
Yeah.
and so like they're just and all of that stuff. Like I saw like I didn't watch the whole State of the Union. I did listen to like a good portion of it. And I got the general vibe of it. It was very good. And then like Huckabee Sanders comes on afterward, and it was as if she is responding to libs of TikTok and not Joe Biden. You know, she's like,
Yeah.
"We normal people don't like all these blue-haired lesbians, like you know, talking about gender all the time." Like, and it's like, did you like who are you talking to?
Yeah.
Like, you know, like. Joe Biden was talking about the Chip Act and like standing tall with you for Ukraine, and we can bring back manufacturing. And then the Republican response is like, "Go back to Cal Berkeley, you Antifa!" Like, and like,
Yeah.
not that the anti woke stuff it does work, but I do think that Biden's able to neutralize it in a way. And I see Chuck Johnson was on here for a little bit, but like Chuck Johnson is absolutely true. I mean, I voted for Biden. I absolutely don't regret it. I'll be pleased as punch to vote for him again. But I did vote for him in a way of like, okay, let this Trump thing is just totally toxic. We got to end it. Biden at least is sane and something. But I underestimated him. I mean, I think you can make a Charles makes this argument, and maybe it's overly strong, but it's getting at a point, which is that he actually has a "Make America Great Again" agenda, and
Yeah.
like unironically, things like I've met people in Montana who are benefiting from the Chip Act and are engaging in very, very high level manufacturing in the United States. And that was like the core of what Trump was promising, you know?
Yes.
And instead, we ended up with his nonsense and J6 or whatever. Um, and Biden kind of maybe because he's old to some degree, but also maybe because he has a deft political sense. He kind of like you steal the thunder of your enemy. That's a really powerful move.
Yeah, it was when he talks about bringing back manufacturing, and he made this sort of populist gesture to the middle class and so forth. And it
Yeah,
was reminiscent of what a Democrat might do around 2000 or in the late 90s, which of course.
1985. Yeah, yeah,
And I was kind of stunned because I thought if you respond in a negative way to that, that just there's no way that works for you because that's an appeal to the frankly to the Republican base as it is right now.
right. Yeah. I mean, Paul Songas, I believe, said this in like 1993 or something. He was like, the Cold War ended and Germany and Japan won. And what he meant by that was that we're buying BMWs and Siemens and so on, or Toyotas, like um, the high level manufacturing, high paying jobs in manufacturing are in Germany and Japan. Now, the Japan has obviously gone through lost decades and all this kind of stuff, but he was kind of getting at like it was a Buchananite message or a Ross Perot message. I mean, he was getting at
Mm.
some like basic nationalism, you could say. And yeah, I think the politician that can kind of capture that is gonna it's a winner.
It it absolutely is, and just I thought with Marjorie Taylor Greene and similar people, just when he's making that sort of appeal, and you're basically just heckling from the peanut gallery, "Boo! Sit down, you suck." It's just
Yeah.
it's I cannot imagine a worse look.
Or like I was talking to someone like I woke up yesterday and she's like walking around the Capitol with a balloon, and I was like, what in the hell is this? Like, what? I don't even understand the message. Like, you're the Chinese balloon. What? Or the Chinese balloon is innocuous and Joe Biden overreacted. Like, what in the hell are you saying? Even like, I have no idea what your message is. You're just being an obnoxious person, you know. And it's ultimately not a winner. It's just not. It's kind of like a short term fix, but like long term, it's just like, ugh, give me a break. Shut
Yeah.
up.
No, it reminds me kind of bringing it back to film. There was one I saw recently that I'd never heard of it even before, but it was called it actually had Cameron Diaz, and it was in the late
Uh-huh.
90s. It was called The Last Supper. Maybe you've heard of it, but it's
I've never seen that.
it's about a group of uh, well, spoilers here, but it's not too bad. A group of graduate students who kind of accidentally fall into they're liberal and they end up actually murdering these sort of conservative people who come to their house. And the first time it's because it was some trucker who went nuts and attacked them and so forth. But
Hmm.
then they get into a thing where they think they're making the world better by having all these right wing people. But it devolves from people who seem genuinely unhinged to like they attack a woman for not liking Catcher in the Rye, stuff like that. And
Yeah.
so it just steadily devolves. But by the end, there's this guy who's supposed to be Rush Limbaugh, and it's like a late '90s or mid '90s vision of Rush Limbaugh, and it's actually Ron Perlman playing this sort
Hmm.
of character who's a conservative pundit who lights everything up. And they have him to dinner, and the way they do it is they poison it in the wine. But when they have him to dinner, he makes all these statements about, the real work is done by everyone in the middle. And he's just very much non ideological at dinner. And they begin to have doubts about the morality of killing him. And he's like the kingpin of who they've wanted to take out. And
Hmm.
he makes these various, oh, these people on the Christian right. I'm always amused by how they ascribe everything bad to humanity and everything good to God. Ha ha ha. And he's just this thing. And they
Hmm.
have a breakdown in a dissent after he's given this very reasonable, eloquent speech about free speech and society and dissent and blah blah blah. And he's lighting up a cigar. And over the course of the summer, as they've murdered all these people, he sees a couple newspapers lying around. He starts piecing it together in his mind. And then they come back and he proposes a toast and it cuts out. And he's like, "Oh, don't worry, I didn't pour the corked wine. I didn't pour that wine. It's fine." And it at the end of it all, it zooms out onto a painting of five people looking like the graduate students sprawled around, and it's Ron Perlman as the Rush Limbaugh figure walking away, smoking a cigar in a suit, and it's the backdrop of him running for president, and it's implied that he's going to go on to become a sort of right wing dictatorial figure, and that's the guy who actually overcomes these sort of well meaning but sort of mid wit grad students. He's the
Yeah.
one who overcomes them, and he's the one who wins. And I thought back to that when I see people like Marjorie Taylor Greene who get so caught up kind of in their own ideology. It's like the monster who uses that as a tool is the one who actually overcomes.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
so I was kind of
So hold on. Are
reminded,
you saying that Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to overcome this, or
no, no,
okay,
I'm I'm saying she's one of the wackadoodles who
gets whacked?
gets whacked basically. Unless she's a lot more intelligent than I think she is. But it's kind of like, the real one is the one who's not necessarily making the outrageous provocative statements.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, not to go on too much of a tangent there, but I'm reminded of that a little bit when I see the publicity stunts like the balloons. It's like,
Hmm.
that doesn't speak to power or to the will that would overcome that.
Right. Yeah. Because you have to be able to look at it straight and not actually believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's do this.
Well,
I am gonna finish my workout, but
sure.
yeah, it was good talking to you. I'm glad we had this discussion. I'll let some other people talk.
Thank you so much. I was surprised. I looked down and saw you there, but it's an honor and it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. This was
Yeah,
great.
pleasure's mine. Pleasure's mine. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye bye.
Bye.
Uh, all right. I'll let a few more of you guys in here. Light Pat, you've been here for a while. You wanted to speak the first time around. Go ahead, man.
Hello?
Light Pat.
Hey,
Hey,
got the new mic.
wonderful. Go for it, man.
Yeah. I think one big thing that I picked up when you were talking about Stephen King is just a lot of what I've seen with Gen Z, compared to a few years ago, they were, it was during the kind of AR phase. And I recently commented on your pinned tweet. Um, and that was kind of because there wasn't really anything there, and that was kind of my criticism towards a lot of those guys at the time on Discord.
Yeah.
Um, because there wasn't really much of a vision. I mean, I was not that people shouldn't have done some sort of message or defending what was being destroyed at the time, but the way people were kind of not that act not that you know we should have stopped building momentum, but one of the major fallings was not having a vision, and you have a kind of vacuum that was quickly filled with worse something that was not made, and you had a
Yeah.
lot of these figures taking control, and it's kind of in a sense, as tragic the boomers are, it's like we have an even worse form of boomer that's now taken over. I mean, for me, I don't know. I'm kind of border between. Growing up, I didn't really identify with millennials. I'm just like these cringy millennials with their annoying music. Like I remember the George Bush years when it was, a different America. I think there was a little bit of, I mean, just to kind of sidetrack here, I do think like in the early 2000s, which kind of built off the 90s, there was like a kind of, like you obviously had stuff going on in the background, but there was still kind of that superpower vibe we had that was losing. But I don't know. I feel like it was a lot of people say it was like after 2008 everything's kind of been the same, but even then not much. Anyways, both the Zoomers, they don't really it's like they will, they might listen to old music, but they don't really have much of a connection to the time. And you know you even forget the boomers. I mean, the boomers, they have what they have, but sometimes you do have a connection to ancient European tales,
Hmm.
that's the richness that's just lost because, well, that they have their names, that you lose all that.
Yeah, the internet just changed a lot of things on a very fundamental
But
level.
also,
And
yeah, the
yeah.
purgings and all that have happened. It's like it's hard to really find the good stuff, as they say. You know, like going through your grandparents' book collection.
Yeah. Well, there was a this was kind of a shocking thing recently, but there was a kid who is saying, and I would imagine he's too young that he shouldn't be properly allowed on the
Oh
internet
yeah.
yet. But he was saying, I was going through my drawers and I came across my dad's old PlayStation 2,
Oh wow. I
which
remember my dad would get a bunch of Formula One racing games. It was probably the
nice.
first video games I played. Was like just like going through the sand pit on that.
Yeah, but it was kind of
Yeah.
shocking. Just there was like a message from the future. you know?
Oh yeah. Time capsule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, that was great. And to your bigger point, yeah, we always need vision, and we always need people to articulate it. You can't have a culture of critique forever. So
Yep. Or irony.
yes, thank you. Yeah. Uh, Caravelt 737. You've had a request for a while, so if you're ready, go ahead.
Hey, you hear me?
Yes, how's it going, man?
Great, great. How about yourself?
I'm doing well.
Great, great. I wanted to ask you the following. So, in regards to the latest cultural shift and what's going on in general in the state of the country, what exactly? Because I'm not understanding with you and also Chuck Johnson, Spencer. You guys is like position exactly. Like I resonate with some of it, but just exactly. Are you guys liberal? Are you guys just like your own party? What is the deal with that? If you can just clarify, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. I can't speak for them as such. I can speak for myself. I would say I do consider myself to be right wing. I don't really abandon that label. But part of what was good about the alt right and what was good about it at the higher levels was that you could kind of steer away from some shibboleths, as it were. So you could say something like, I believe in nationalism or I believe in our people, but that didn't automatically mean that you discounted the idea of healthcare, for example. Does
Mm,
that help at all?
I got you. I got you. Okay. So I understand. So here's my other question. Are you one of those did you vote for Biden in 2020?
I don't think I voted in 2020.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah, I wasn't pleased with either choice at that time.
So do you think do you still consider yourself alt right?
Yeah, in as much as that label has meaning anymore, sure.
Right, I understand. So in right now it's kind of interesting place because I've been seeing some of the back, I've been watching some lectures back from, the alt right good old days, and now seeing the complete political change. You're saying you didn't vote for Biden. You're not a liberal. You classify as right wing and all that. I know that. I know Chuck Johnson is very liberal, as well as Richard Spencer. You have a Ukrainian flag in your profile. So in your not your profile in your name, is that like ironic, or is that you're just a supporter?
That's absolutely unironic.
Okay, interesting. So,
Yeah, I guess I would say this. Maybe this would be part of it. I don't believe in endless reaction. I don't believe in just tearing down the current order all the time. If they do something that is good, that's there. And in that case, as far as the Ukraine thing goes, that's a whole big can of worms. I'm kind of hoping to wrap up this space, but I will simply say that I was against a European land war. I was against the land war in the West, and I could not rationalize a way in which Russia was forced to attack. So I'll just leave it at that.
got it. Do you have, if you could pick anyone as president, do you have an ideal person, like ideal way you want the country to kind of steer in a direction right now, if you could pick?
That's such a that's a loaded question. I don't really think in those terms of who immediately I would pick. Like there's no like ideal politician right now that I would just say, yeah, that's my guy.
Hmm. Got it. Got it. All right.
I guess I could just say in the short term, I would prefer to see a stronger sort of NATO going forward because I think these alliances that unite Western nations are ultimately good, and I think they provide useful and legitimate precedents.
Uh,
I would say that.
I actually agree. I think the West is great. It actually cringes me when I see people go full dick ride on Vladimir Putin, and this anti quote unquote Christ. It's like, what are you like, are you high? Are you tripping, dude? Like, But so I agree with you there. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, and of course, yeah, and many of them, to be fair, many of them are just very depressed about the state of everything, and it became clear that a lot of them, they it's really their own nations that they think about being conquered by some based in trad source, and I just don't believe that's the reality. So
I agree.
yeah,
That's true.
thank you for coming on, sir.
Thank you.
And finally, uh, Tanner. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, how are you? Yes,
Good.
sir.
How are you?
I'm well, thanks.
Say, I'm from North Dakota, and I was just wondering if you're familiar at all with the Nonpartisan League before. Have you ever heard of that?
No, sir, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, so basically in North Dakota, back in like the 1920s, there was a socialist party that sort of took over, and the views of people in North Dakota fairly conservative, at least on when it comes to moral issues and religion.
Yeah.
It's a difficult place to live with the really cold winters and the strong winds. Not many trees here. Super flat. A lot of farmers though. So this guy AC Townley was able to organize a socialist party to take over the state, and they installed a state-run bank called the Bank of North Dakota. It's the only one like it in the country. And although ideologically we got away from sort of left wing economic views and we've drifted towards more mainstream Republican views on economics in recent years, there's still a big sort of appreciation, I guess, for this idea of, like in my community, there's other than the Walmart, it's pretty much just small businesses. People are able to uh, rapidly build up entrepreneurial projects. Like my brother, before he even finished community college here, which we get paid to go to school here, um,
Nice.
and it's super cheap. And like you can buy a house in town, 5-bedroom house for 30,000. But my brother, he started a business, and now it's a multi-million dollar golf cart business, which just popped up out of nowhere. And it's like, I see what's
Nice.
happening in the rest of the world. I've traveled to, half the states in the country. I lived in Idaho for a bit, and even though Idaho seems more Republican, like they just don't have that. It's almost like a closeness of the community type thing, and it's not so much rooted in like government initiatives. It's just like the hard work of the people building something, and that's sort of what I've seen in the last few years disappearing in the rest of the country, and even here you're starting to see, mostly because of like a social decay, and I think technology's facilitated that. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on some of that?
Yes, it sounds like you guys have discovered something very special there. These sorts of formulations are very fascinating. Obviously, yeah, that sounds great. Obviously, community has been disappearing throughout the rest of the country. What was I want to make a note of this for later. What did you say that institution was called?
So it's a nonpartisan league, and they used to be the
Nonpartisan.
Republican nonpartisan league, and now they've merged with the Democratic Party, and it's basically become non-existent as a player in politics. But uh, for for what they did, they had like 3 governors. One of them was ousted for Bolshevism, and there's like
Hmm.
political cartoons that he was in cahoots with Lenin. And
Oh wow.
yeah, but they made a state-run flour mill, which is still around today. I think it's in Grand Forks. And then the state-run bank, and then there was something else that they had too. I can't quite remember. Oh, a state-run elevator. And then that's the other thing too, is a lot of farming. So you had small, you see all these little small farmsteads everywhere, and it used to be all small farmers, but then because of technology, you saw, you had to buy more equipment, and they ended up with bigger farms. So you had people who just buy out the small farmers, and then people move away. And yeah, I mean, I guess we've seen, just because of what's happened in the major cities, there's a lot of people who aren't moving away now, and so
Yeah.
we're seeing like in real estate, like right now, my rent. I have a 2-bedroom apartment. It's $400 a month, and utilities are included. So like I just can't
Wonderful.
find that anywhere else in the U.S. Something that's this nice, and a community. There's no crime, and um, it's absolutely just a great place to live.
Yes, sir. That sounds very idyllic. That does almost seem to smack of a little bit older way of doing things. That the Midwest has always been interesting because I know they've needed the sorts of state policies, and they've needed the sort of institutions you've just described. But at the same time, their kind of hearts have been very kind of conservative in the best sense, and traditionally minded, and that absolutely is an underserved community, and has been for a long time. So
Well, I think there's just a big disconnect right now between the politicians and the media and people who sort of were surrounded by an artificial world. Like, I think if you grow up, say you grow up out west in the mountains, like if you're surrounded by nature and places where you have like national forest land or places that are preserved, North Dakota has very little public land, but since it's all farmland, it's just like open range. You don't see, towering concrete everywhere. There's roads everywhere and great accessibility that you don't get in a lot of Western states. But um, just to have that closeness to the work, like the farming is a big thing around here. Like my dad worked on a farm, and the oil industry is really big out west in North Dakota. And just sort of those industries where you like some of the most important things that we use in our society that we don't really think about. I think for our politicians and media to have a close relationship with those people and to like really experience what kind of conditions they work in, and what kind of people make up this country and really make things happen, because I do believe it's a small percentage of really hardworking people who keep this country together and keep their
Yeah.
families together and are really beacons of light for everybody else. And the more that we demoralize everybody and give people an artificial world to live in, the less of those people are going to be around and the less influential they'll be, and we're just going to see everything go downhill. So hopefully that doesn't continue.
Yes, and thank you so much. I'll definitely look into that, the nonpartisan league. So
Yep, no problem.
thank
And
you, sir. Thank you for coming by and sharing that.
yep, thank you. Have a good one.
You as well.
Bye.
Bye bye. All right, everyone. This has been an amazing space, much better than I thought it would be. But I've been doing this for a couple of hours now, so thank you for the amazing turnout here, and thank you to everyone who spoke. Got a guest appearance from Mr. Spencer there. So, but now I'm going to call it a wrap. So, thanks very much, everyone. Thank you for dropping by. We'll have to do this again really soon. So, take it easy and have a great night.